Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and as always, I'm joined on our state-of-the-art radio program by my first officer, Jeremy Graventon. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show, while Jeremy and I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before we may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, here it is. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are celebrating our one-year anniversary, and not even really celebrating. What it is we had chosen that date, being September 11th of 2015, as the premiere episode launch date for our state-of-the-art radio program, because we wanted to reflect upon the unity that began 14 years ago on that point, now 15 years ago. It's very shocking that it takes an atrocity of that magnitude to bring the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours back to the level of being together, to see that there is some greater aspect. Now, what we have reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is the fact that, we have to have that sort of unity. And that unity comes about through the Constitution. There is no other way that is achievable. There is no other aspect about which we can do that. And one of the things that has come to the forefront throughout this 2016 presidential election cycle is this claim that we have nationalism on the rise here. But we don't, because there is only one thing that truly defines us, both as a nation and as a people, and that is our shared United States Constitution, and it is not part of the mainstay of politics in America, at least not right now as we sit here and speak into our microphones. So it really does require us to do a little bit of soul searching, to look into what matters, and to once again get in touch with our true heritage, character, spirit, and identity. And the only way that we can do that is to get back to basics. And basics, as we have mentioned so many times, is found in the clear and concise language that is contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. So on September 11th, what we are focusing on now is the greater angels of our nature, as it has been put in the past. But what is the greater angels of our nature? The greater angels of our nature is our Constitution and this community of popular sovereigns. And I think that on this day, above all else, is what we really ought to get back to.
Speaking of the unity that surrounds this date, this anniversary, and the tragedy that launched it, that unity is not found, certainly within this presidential campaign. It's not the same type of unity that Donald Trump has tried to portray. It's not the same type of unity that Hillary Clinton has tried to portray or put forth. That's a different type of unity. That's a false unity. If people reflect on what today is and what it signifies, and they look at the videos that were taking place 15 years ago, and they see people standing around, holding hands, praying, singing various different patriotic songs, God bless America. You don't see that kind of unity nowadays. You really don't. And it's because of the divisiveness and the balkanization of what the political parties, our political system has brought forth. It's depressing, it's disheartening, and it's infuriating, to say the least.
Well, yes, because what we see is they are trying to use any avenue to try and politicize everything. It's like, as Kat Sunstein said, they'll use any tragedy or travesty or even atrocity to try and push forward an agenda. But we have to recall that the United States of America is far greater than any agenda. We're not we can't be compressed to an agenda. We are far greater than that. It's why I've always said that the whole of the nation is greater than the sum of its parts. And the reason that I can say that is that it ties directly in to this aspect that we are based on the natural law tenets. And those very natural law tenets, by their nature, are timeless. But you see that all of these nefarious elements that we have discussed on every episode of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, since our inception this time a year ago, have come together in a bit of a cabal. It's a conglomeration to try and dispirit the American people, to try and pit American citizen against American citizen in this overarching goal and agenda of, essentially tearing us apart so that we become more malleable, so that they can fundamentally transform us. Recall that Barack Hussein Obama said back in 2008, the first time that he was vying for the highest office in the land, that we were, 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. And what he meant by that is that the United States would be drastically changed, that they would transform us permanently away from being a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic into some frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist dystopia that truly has no place in an open and honest society, above all a free society like that of these United States of America. And it's not just something that we can easily get around, because they have been working towards this for the past century and a half. And they've been so meticulous about it, they've been so patient with it, and they've been unwilling to back away from it, that this really is the crux of who they are as a movement. And it shows that they have no interest in the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, because they believe that they know better than the people. They believe that they know what is best to secure the nation and to push the nation forward. But their vision for the nation has no connotation or connection with the foundational image that our founding fathers dreamed of at the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. And I think that's why we say it is so important to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby your fundamental and inalienable rights, which have been endowed to you by your creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. It's because if you lose sight of that, as George Washington warned of in his farewell address, then penultimate concerns begin to rise to the surface, and the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, and above all oppression begin to take root in a free society. They begin to make a mockery of the system and to tear it apart from within, and there's no way around that. Truly, there's not.
A lot of people are basing their thought process this election on being angry. They're angry that the politicians that they elected have not done what they said they were going to do, so they're going to vote for Trump because he's not a politician, blah, blah, blah. We've heard the whole spiel. There is, as we mentioned before, a righteous anger that needs to be incurred by the people. That righteous anger, again, points back to this very day 15 years ago. That was righteous anger. That was unification and righteous anger. Now, what these Fabian elitists need to realize is that if foreign entities are going to attack our country and kill innocent people, and you saw how angry we were then, imagine how angry we the people are going to be when our own government, our own country, and those that are running it have turned their backs on the people and have continued to attack the people, we the people, with our rights. See, that is righteous anger, and that's a righteous anger that has not been felt or exhibited since 1776, and then again in 1812, and then I think it was 1843 down in Texas.
1836, if you're talking about the Texas Revolution.
Yes, and so when we see that righteous anger, when we have people that are governing over us try and impede and infringe upon our rights, hell hath no fury when it comes to that kind of anger. And this is what we've been warning about. We don't want to see it have to come to that. It shouldn't have to come to that, because that is not what our founding fathers envisioned. They laid this out, the tenets of the Constitution. They did that for us. They penned it down and put it out to us. It's like that woman asked Benjamin Franklin, what have you given us? And he says, a republic if you can keep it. They knew that this may come to happen, but they took every measure and every prevention that they could to see it not come to fruition again. We don't want to see it happen, but if it does, then so be it, because that is the only way at that point, that is the last option we have of maintaining our sovereignty. And when that comes down to that point, that righteous anger is going to be so infuriating. It's going to be worse than the burns of 10,000 suns.
Mm-hmm.
And it better be adhered to, and it better be heeded, because it's just going to be a mess for everybody. There will be no winner at that point. So
there already is no winner in the way that they're pushing it, though, Jeremy.
Sure.
Because they are just so quick to try and attack all that we stand for, all that we hold near and dear. And you notice that none of the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have really gone forth and shown some of the things like the bullhorn speech that George W. Bush gave in the immediate aftermath of those dastardly and deliberate attacks. And I think it's kind of important that we focus on that a little bit, even though yes, he was a later disappointment. At that time, he did the right things to try and unify the people. He did the right things to try and respond to this great atrocity that had been orchestrated against the United States. And make no mistake about it, folks, they were literally trying to attack everything that we stand for, everything that we represent. And they wanted to attack our freedom, because deep down, that's exactly what the Islamo-fascist barbarians want. They loathe and they despise not just these United States of America, but also our Western philosophy, our Western culture, the Enlightenment era thinking, a bit like the alternative or alt-right does as well. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper, but I've got a soundbite that I want to bring up here that is of that bullhorn speech that George W. Bush gave in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, because I think it's so important to remember what it was that we went through. So I'm going to key that up.
Thank you all. I want you all to know. Can't go any louder. I want you all to know that America today is on bended knee in prayer for the people whose lives were lost here, for the workers who work here, for the families who mourn. This nation stands with the good people of New York City and New Jersey and Connecticut as we mourn the loss of thousands of our citizens. I can hear you! I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
I mean, you cannot get around that. You cannot get around the impact that that had on us, both as a nation and as a people. There's just no way to ignore that that was a critical aspect of beginning the process of healing. But not just that, it was the beginning of the process of attempting to take those Islamo-fascists to justice. Now, eventually, he did break away from that. You're either with us or against us. You're either for the terrorists or you are against us, because, again, twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism began to rear their ugly heads again. And that is what's so destructive about them, because we just can't do anything with it. If you can't identify the enemy, and if you are completely unwilling to identify the enemy, then you are already fighting an uphill battle, one that is destined to meet with failure each and every time, because it goes against your ability to identify the enemy, to act against the enemy, and to secure your interests. And again, with the idea of moral relativism playing into this, it goes down the lines that if moral relativism goes into place, that means there's no right and there's no wrong. It means that deep down you feel as though your own position cannot be correct because all positions are equally correct. And the way that you see it is they try and say, well, look, Christians were bad in the past. Look back to the Crusades. They try and bring up these irrelevant pieces of nonsense that have no connotation or connection with the current events. Last I checked, Christians haven't been flying planes into buildings, killing over 3,000 people. And they haven't been targeting the safest form of travel in history right now. No, the Crusades were damn near 1,000 years ago. I mean, nobody who was involved in the original Crusades is alive today. They haven't been alive for hundreds of years. So again, it shows you just how duplicitous, just how intellectually disingenuous these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists really are. And it also demonstrates that they don't give a damn about the health, safety, and well-being of the American people. And already I can hear the shrill, disharmonious, and discordinal voices of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists going, but Randy, the Christians are bad, and you know, we really do care about people. That's why we want universal health care. Bovine excrement. It's not that you care about the people. What it is that you want control. That's all it is. You want to control every facet of our daily lives. To hell with you. Because what you're doing, you are the ones that are spreading the seeds of dissent. You are the ones that are spreading the seeds of division, instead of calling for us to unify. That's why you engage in identity politics. That's why you support these domestic terrorist organizations such as Black Lives Matters. It's why they do all of this. And of course, they've got willing participants and allies in the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And it's sickening. It's disgusting.
Talking about being able to identify our enemy. When George W. Bush gave that bullhorn speech, he identified the enemy right there, right on the spot. In fact, he even said that you're going to be hearing from us all very soon. We have to take that into perspective with regards to this election. We have identified the enemies, and people will say, well, that's kind of crass. You're calling Donald Trump an enemy. Yes, he is. He absolutely is. Because his mannerisms, everything he stands for, not what he portrays, but what he stands for. He's giving you a false dichotomy there. He is an enemy to the Constitution. Anybody that would actually support or even think that the government's job is to provide housing, healthcare, and education is an enemy of the United States Constitution. Anybody that sees no value in the United States Constitution is an enemy to the United States Constitution, thus an enemy to we the people. That's how that works. If there's anybody out there that wants to willingly infringe upon anybody's rights, it has to be said again that their rights end where ours begin. When we don't,
because that's how our system works. It's
Sure.
how our system's always worked. That's how you have a free nation.
And if we fail to identify or just ignore the identity of an enemy, including political candidates, then what does our nation come to? It certainly doesn't speak of the unity that we had 15 years ago on this day. Because last I checked, I was alive then. I remember watching various different channels. It was on all channels. Didn't matter what channel you turned it to, unless it was like BET, and then you probably saw a bunch of Muslims, shaking their fists and yelling, "Aloha snack bar" or whatever the case is. They were probably cheering for them. But whatever channel I saw, the people, it didn't matter, black, white, Hispanic, all walks of life, all different races, in unity together, pissed off, wanting to get justice, and doing whatever it could, or they could, to do so. Whatever they could to go and help out. I have friends who are in the fire departments here in law enforcement that went to New York City to help out, to help rummage through those piles of rubble, looking for any signs of life. They put their lives on the line. And this is, Randy, this is what I want to go off on a tangent here, but I'll bring it right back. This whole thing with the NFL and all of these players not standing for the national anthem because they're pissed off about how cops are. You know what? Screw you. You sycophantic, elitist pieces of crap. Screw you. I'm boycotting the NFL. I've boycotted the NFL in the past, and I've only watched little snippets here and there because my son would watch it. But here's the thing. I'm done. I'm done with the NFL. They are persona non grata. They do not exist in my world anymore because the NFL is allowing these players to do this. Well, it's their First Amendment right. Again, when you are going to attack individuals like law enforcement officers because you bought into this crap that they're the ones that are oppressing people, you know what? If people wouldn't go out and commit crimes, they wouldn't have to deal with law enforcement. Therefore, they wouldn't be putting themselves in a position to feel oppressed, to play the victim card.
And here's the other thing. Yes, they have the right to say that. They have the right to do whatever they want. But here's the thing. They also have to accept the consequences for it. And the consequences for going out there and acting like a bunch of idiots, like a bunch of hooligans, and trying to make this case based on left-wing propaganda talking points is you are going to be treated like the piece of human excrement that you are. And there really is no other way to describe that, because what they are trying to do is to, once again, go forth with the tried and true, albeit threadbare tactics and strategies of divide and conquer. And again, it's because they think that the nation's so unfair. I have a message for the people like Colin Kaepernick. If you think that you have been mistreated, give back all that money. If you think that you've been mistreated, stop playing. Just go away. Maybe then you can make a statement that people will listen to. But don't expect the fans, the crowds, and the audiences to put up with your bovine excrement, because they're not going to. And the fact that they're doing it again on this day of days, just shows that they have no sense of shame whatsoever. And of course, that should come as no shock or surprise to anyone who's paying a modicum of attention to exactly what's going on in this once thriving and flourishing representative Republican vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. These people are the ones that are wishing to push us further and further towards the precarious cliff, towards the abyss, to try and knock us over the edge. Well, it's not going to work. It's not going to work because we will not tolerate it. This is a nation that is great because of the people and because of those natural law tenets that are codified in the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And the fact that little idiots like Colin Kaepernick and all of the other morons that wanted to protest this nation, even though they've been elevated to such lofty heights within this nation, really ought to have another thing coming to them. They really ought to be publicly shamed. And, you know, that's part of the problem with culture and society, with the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. It's that we no longer hold people accountable. We no longer hold people responsible for their words, deeds, and actions. Well, I think it's well past time that we start doing that again in this country. Then we'll see if they keep up with this charade and these shenanigans that truly, clearly do not have a place in an open, honest, but above all, free society like that of these United States of America.
One thing that would have made me happy to hear about would have been all of those other players on the team. If their teammates, any of their teammates, decided to sit down on the bench during the national anthem, at the beginning of the play of the national anthem, walk over in front of them, stare them dead in the eye, and then turn a 180 and turn their backs to them, and then sing as loud as they could those glorious words. Now, a lot of people would say, well, what's that going to prove? It proves a statement. It proves a statement of saying, you may be my teammate, but you know what? I'm going to hold you accountable to this. Because how dare you? See, again, this speaks to unity. Teams, sports teams, is all about unity. That's why they're broken down into different units on a team. Football team, you have the defensive unit, you have the offensive unit, you have different units, the first, second, and third string, that come in, and you have different units comprised of different people. But all of those units working together as a whole. How can you have unity on a team when you have teammates that will absolutely just vehemently refuse to acknowledge our national anthem? You know, that right there is, again, political correctness and moral relativism rearing its ugly head and creating that divisiveness. Because if you don't have unity at that, how can you be a productive team on the field and win games? Furthermore, how can you be a productive organization when it comes down to the owners of these teams actually being able to make money in a capitalistic society? Because guess what's going to happen? The fans are going to stop buying the tickets. They're going to stop buying the merchandise and paraphernalia. And then guess what's going to happen? The team's eventually going to have to fold up shop and close down. Mm-hmm. And now what are you doing? People that had nothing to do with it, that want to watch football just for the sheer enjoyment of watching people, you know, hit each other, because that's what they get their kicks on. They enjoy that ruggedness, which, by the way, has gone away, is gone, because they've pussified the NFL. You can't even hit the quarterback anymore in certain circumstances. Before, you could just take his head off. It's all coming down to political correctness and moral relativism. And see, that is going to get stronger and stronger if we the people take today's date, or days like today, and circumstances and events that happen on this date, and we forget them, and it goes away. This is what they want. That's part of one of their tools that they use in revisionist history. Because the more and more people forget about it, the more they become complacent, and they have the chance of saying, well, that's not how it happened. This is how it happened. And thus the conspiracy theorists come back into play. See, they created the conspiracy theories surrounding 9/11. Those conspiracy theories were funded by George Soros, a Fabian, a Nazi narc.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, Jeremy. You have to keep in mind that, let's take one of the things that they've gone out of their way to bury and don't discuss. It's 5 days from today that we are supposed to be celebrating Constitution Day in the United States of America. That should be a day that is well known to the American people as July 4th of 1776. But it's not well known because it's not taught in our institutions of education. It's not put out in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. The frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have infiltrated so many fundamental pillars and cornerstones of our society that they have incrementally begun to chip away at the true foundation of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And again, the only way that we can bring this back, it's not to look for some messianic figure. It's not to try and turn to the government, because that would be falling into the trap of Cloward and Piven. If you recall, back in the 1950s and 60s, Cloward and Piven were these two academician eggheads who wanted to overwhelm the system with this governmental welfare system and to then have the American people knocked down to their knees so that they would crawl to the government on bended knee and beg the government to fix the problem that government created in the first place. Because if you recall, at that time, it was FDR before that who had first set up the so-called welfare system with the New Deal that he set up during the Great Depression. These sorts of things all work in tandem, and they're all pushed forward in an incremental nature and fashion to try and tear this nation apart. Again, this is what they want. They want to weaken us, and that's why they pit American citizen against American citizen. They're hoping that we'll tear out each other's jugular veins and allow this nation collectively to bleed out. Why? So that they can get rid of the fundamental pillars of this idea that we are a rugged individualist nation, that we have the two mainstay things of self-responsibility and self-accountability, and when those things work in tandem, you then get self-determination. When you look at the first opening lines to the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, it starts with the words, "We the people," and that's very significant and very important, and I know that we've oftentimes reiterated this on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, but it's so on point, particularly given as to what happened on this day 15 years ago, that it bears repeating. That we, the people, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, are the ones that built this nation. We are the ones that are endowed with our fundamental and inalienable rights, but with that is couched with the equal and just as powerful duty, obligation, but above all responsibility of proactively maintaining and safeguarding those fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. But we've, in a way, grown complacent. We've allowed the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, as you've mentioned, that it's taking over in every facet of society, including the National Football League or NFL and anything, to literally tear our nation apart, to literally weaken us. And it means that we don't want to face responsibility. We don't want to have to be held accountable for our own words, deeds, and actions. And that's exactly what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists want. Because when you take away responsibility, you allow the society to become malleable, like clay in the hand of a potter, and then it can be reshaped into that sort of Fabian socialist dystopia that honestly has no place in a society like that of the United States of America. There's just no way around that.
Again, the longer we allow these things to happen, the more we, the people, take on this notion and this accept this doctrine of, well, that's not how things are anymore. Things have changed. Well, of course they've changed. That was their whole intention, to change things. Fundamentally change things. There's an old saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. The Constitution's not broken. Don't tamper with it. Don't try and fix it. Don't try and fix the intentions of it by changing the way things are. We could point to several lawsuits, several cases and rulings that have been made where they've taken the Constitution, just thrown it right out the window. The Affordable Care Act, Roe v. Wade, are two main examples you can look at. It's just ridiculous. When you allow these things to happen because you think there's no other alternative. Folks, there's always an alternative. There's always that one solution. 6-2 or fight. That is always going to be a viable solution. Always. It doesn't necessarily mean lock and load and go marching onto your local municipality or government buildings and start shooting up the place and dragging people out. That's not what that means. That means be proactive. It means to understand the Constitution. Get a working knowledge of it. Learn it. And then apply it. Because, see, isn't that how we learn? We absorb information and then we apply it, because you can absorb all the information you want, but it's useless unless you put it into action, unless you apply it. That's one of the...
There's something to take from history. with respect to 9/11, not just 9/11 2001. Let's talk 9/11 76. 9/11 1776. That was the day that New York fell to the British. And had our founding fathers embraced the sort of nonsense that we see taking over today, like with President Barack Hussein Obama trying to go out and call ISIS the junior varsity team and to say that it's just an existential threat to the United States. It doesn't pose a direct threat to the United States. Then we had San Bernardino and all of that. Well, if they had embraced that kind of mindset, we would have never been here. We would have never won the American War of Independence, and we would still be a British colony as we sit here and speak into this microphone. And that's not something that we can allow to occur. We have to use history as a teacher. And one of the things that so many don't realize with respect to that long, drawn-out, bloody affair that was the American War of Independence was just how many times, how on so many separate occasions, we came this close to losing our fight for independence and losing the cause for liberty. But they had faith to keep fighting. They had faith to keep pushing for what they knew in their heart of hearts was right, and that was the only way that they could achieve victory. And again, it's because they held above all other things sacred honor. Sacred honor meant more than anything else to them. That's why they put their wealth, their personal fortunes, their lives, their health, their safety, everything on the line, because to them sacred honor meant so much. What has happened to sacred honor? Well, again, we have to look back at the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism to come to the inexorable conclusion as to exactly what has happened to that fundamental pillar that helped bring about the birth and conception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. Through those twin cancerous doctrines, they have whittled away at everything. So we no longer hold people accountable. We no longer have the ability of society to basically keep people in line. And what a lot of the moral relativists who would push for such perversions as same-sex marriage and all of that crap would say is, look, those traditions and institutions like the Constitution itself are quaint and antiquated and really have no place in a fast-paced modern society like that in which we live today. But again, I point back to the very notion that the fundamental building block of our Constitution and indeed our constitutionally endowed federalist representative Republican form of government is the natural law. And that the natural law, by its very nature, is timeless. But what do I mean when I say natural law? What I mean by the natural law is this is a philosophy that there is a law that is inscribed on the hearts of all humanity, that when you use your personal reasoning and logic, then you can understand it. It can be universally understood. And therefore, it is timeless. It will be just as applicable today as it was during the American War of Independence, as God willing it will be some 235 plus years from today. But again, it requires that we delve into ourselves and ask these soul-prodding questions, these soul-searching questions, to find our sacred honor again, to go back to adhering to sacred honor and placing that on the pedestal that it so rightfully deserves to be upon, because when you lose sight of that, you lose sight of what it is to be a nation. You lose sight of how to move forward for those cherished aspects that we hold near and dear in this country. And it's why so many people today will sit there and say, you know, this isn't the country I was born in. This wasn't the country I was raised in. And just look at the state of blight and disrepair that we find ourselves in right now. And it has all been orchestrated by these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. And that's due, thanks in no small part, to this erroneous notion of voting for the lesser of two evils. What has that gotten us? When you look at this disastrous 2016 presidential election cycle, I think you know damn well what it's gotten us, and it's not good.
Well, it's gotten us to the point to where many of us know who the enemies are. Again, it's people want to talk identity politics. Well, let's identify things within the political spectrum. We have a fascist, Fabian, and then we have a socialist, in two separate parties vying for the seat of power and control as the leader of the free world. If that doesn't strike as a problem in the hearts and minds of individuals, then there's nothing we can do to change that. I mean, that's the feeling I'm getting, because the more we sit here, Randy, and speak into our microphones, and we educate people on this stuff, we put the facts out there, and we put it out there for them to verify. Don't just take our word for it, verify it. Everything that we say. Fact check us if you need to. We're fine with that. We're willing to be held accountable for what we say.
We proactively encourage it.
Absolutely, and if you need help doing it, we can point you in the right direction. It's not that big of a deal. Because we do our research, we do our homework, we look these things up, and we bring them to you. We don't do this for self-aggrandizement. We do this for the betterment of our country. We do this for all of you. This is what unity is. This is what patriotism is. This is what it means to be and hold the title of the ultimate popular wielder of sovereignty. Because it is a responsibility that we have. We all have this responsibility to keep each other held accountable, to keep each other in check, but to also encourage and educate each other. So when we talk about identity politics, we have to identify what's going on. And we can identify the enemies again.
It comes down to the fact that what George Washington was saying when he said that we should avoid breaking into these competing, disparate factions was that when you lose sight of the greater importance of what really matters in the nation, that's when you start to lose this idea of a community. There's a reason why I say this was a once vibrant community of popular sovereigns. It was that the United States citizens understood that it was not just their duty and obligation to proactively maintain and safeguard their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights just for themselves, but it was also to ensure that the progeny would have it and that their fellow popular sovereigns were protected as well. That's why you have a jury of your peers in our criminal justice system and even in the civil justice system. It ties into this idea that as a close-knit community of popular sovereigns, we are best able and best suited to address those problems better than any other system. And yes, while the American judiciary has a lot of problems and has rank and rampant corruption that really shows no signs of getting better at any time in the foreseeable future, it is still the best judicial system that we have on God's green earth. It is still the best system that is out there. And again, one of the things that matters on a day like this is that we look for that unity to draw us back together so that we stand up for what matters, so that we again defend all that we hold near and dear, both as a nation and as a people. And for far too long now, for frighteningly far too long now, we have allowed that to break away from us. We have allowed ourselves to be distracted by penultimate concerns, allowing ourselves to be pushed in incorrect areas and what have you, and that has just worked to our great detriment. And the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have used that to their advantage each and every time to try and get their vision in place. And it's why we said for the past century and a half now, they have been incrementally pushing us further and further and further and further to the left, and it really has been detrimental for us because we've lost sight of who we are, both as a nation and as a people, and we can ill afford that, particularly when you consider that the United States of America is in the midst of an identity crisis coupled with a slew of constitutional crises, thanks due in no small part to the twisted machinations of this disastrous Barack Hussein Obama regime. I wish that there were words of comfort and solace that I could convey in regards to this, but there are none.
We have to maintain the root foundational principle of what it means to be we the people. That, in order to do that, we have to reflect back on events throughout our nation's history, and even through the world history as a whole. We have to reflect back on events that occurred today 15 years ago. And we have to remember what happened. Remember how we felt. Remember the anger. Remember the sadness, the discouragement. But also remember that through all of that, we're still standing. Why are we still standing? Because of the natural law tenets that are ingrained in the foundational aspects of what our country is, our republic, rooted in the Constitution. We are still standing because ultimately, in the heart of hearts of everybody, I truly believe that that fire will never burn out and fade away. It will always be there. Some people
may... as long as there is a breath in our lungs, we won't give up on that. And, you know, Jeremy, I want to take it a step further, because what it says is that there is a type of community that is a family. And our nation is a family. We really do have to think of it that way. And that's something that has slowly been whittled away over the years. And that, again, has been brought about by those who politicize everything. Going back to your example with the National Football League, you notice that they politicize that. They politicize education. They politicize food. They politicize going to the grocery store, driving cars, doing anything. It's because deep down they are incapable of divorcing themselves from this twisted machination that they have just been pushing and pushing and pushing relentlessly, meticulously, because they don't have a care for this nation in the world. They don't want us to flourish because in a way they think we stole it. They think that we are these wicked, mean, nasty people. And again, that's where moral relativism and political correctness come in. They're utilized as a weapon. But I also, at this juncture, want to flip that on the so-called alternative or alt-right that are trying to sit there and say, well, those of us who are pushing for our Constitution and for having civil discourse are weak. They call us cuckservatives when, in fact, they are cucksuckers because deep down, what they think is we would allow anyone to just sleep with our wives. That's where cuckold comes from. They think that by embracing the law of the land and these natural law tenets that are immutable, that we are fools. They think that we are just too abstract. Again, it's because it's too intense, logically speaking, for them. They can't wrap their little minds around it, and it's because they're too busy sniffing glue or spray paint or whatever it is they want to sniff and eat back in the back of the classroom. They are those that were the juvenile delinquents. It's just they never grew up. And that's what Trump is too. And so that's why the alt-right's attracted to it. But the alt-right is not pushing for the type of unity that we saw in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. I mean, in one of the sky bridges that I recently did, I brought up that video from Ramsey Paul, that freak who was sitting there saying that the flag is just a piece of cloth. Well, that's not the way my grandparents felt about it. That's not the way that my great-grandparents felt about it. It's not the way that every ancestor of mine who fought in any one of the American conflicts going back to the revolution itself felt about it. It goes to show that these people loathe and despise who we are both as a nation and as a people, and that makes them hardly distinguishable or differential from the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists who are attacking us. And it's disgusting because what they're doing is they're spreading that venom. They're spreading that poison. They go out and attempt to engage in character assassination against people as if that's going to somehow magically make everybody feel better. Kumbaya. Give me an ever-loving break. It doesn't work.
You know, speaking of the flag, I understand that the courts have ruled that it is First Amendment protection and a First Amendment right for people to burn the flag and do this and that. And again, we're not out to disparage anybody's rights. Do we agree with people burning the flag? Hell no. See, what people don't understand, and there's actually, if you look in the codified federal laws, and I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but it deals with flag etiquette. Proper display of the flag. Flag should never touch the ground. Nothing should ever happen to that flag until it's retired. It should have
a light on it at night, too.
At all times. And the symbolism for that is deeply rooted in our principles. Now, the proper way to dispose of a flag is to burn it.
But in a ceremony. You're supposed to fold it, and then you're supposed to salute it as it goes up. I mean, that was one of the first things I ever did as a color guard with the Boy Scouts was to retire a flag.
Yes.
It is a beautiful ceremony. It is a very somber, solemn occasion. It's not the way that these... Yeah, it's not the way that these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists go out there and just disparage it. It's not stomping on it and then burning it, because, as you said, it's not supposed to touch the ground. But to tie it back into this First Amendment aspect of which you were, hitting at there, yes, they absolutely have the right to it, but they need to accept the personal responsibility of the consequences that are going to come from that. And if that means they're going to get their posterior beaten, well, sorry.
Yeah. Again, that's no different than, you walking up and remember this knockout game. These individuals walking down the street and just random people they come across just turn around and sucker punch them in the face, trying to knock them out. Well, what happens when you do something like that? See, to me, playing the knockout game, if an individual would have, me and my wife walking down the street, someone would have punched her in the face, guess what? That individual probably would have been shot.
Yeah, and rightfully so, because defense of others is a defense.
Sure. And here's the thing. To me, that reaction is no different than someone walking up to me or taking my flag off its standard, off its flagpole in my yard and torching it in my yard. Guess what's going to happen? I will probably come out and shoot that individual. Would it be justified? In my mind, it would. For the simple fact that A, number one, it's destruction of my property. B, it's arson, which could have actually. How do I know they weren't going to pick up the burning flag and throw it on my house to set fire to my house, thus damaging or injuring people potentially inside my house? See, you have rights. And again, your rights end where others begin. If you want to exercise your rights in front of me to where it's going to disparage or impede on my rights, you're going to suffer the consequences. And that's the way it should be. That, again, falls back into this unity aspect of what formed us as a republic. The British tried to infringe upon the
judicial system works. It goes to how a judicial system works, because if you do not have a system of accountability, if you do not have a system that recognizes the rights of the sovereign individual, then you don't have a republic. Think of it this way. It goes to what it means to be a republic. Why was the United States of America never founded as a direct democracy? Well, it's because a direct democracy only recognizes the sovereign authority of the majority. And there is a term for that called a tyranny of the majority. And it brings me to one of the things that Benjamin Franklin had said at the outset of this country. The way that he defined democracy was 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting on what's for dinner. And under a tyranny of the majority, the sheep's going to lose all the time. But then when you get into a socialist system, Then you have what's known as insular and discrete minorities, or what can be coined or termed or deemed as a tyranny of the minority. That's where the sheep would be able to say that wolves can't eat and just let them starve to death. That's what the people like Black Lives Matters wants to do. That's what people like the alt-right kind of wants to do when they try and say that our nation is defined upon this tribalism and race-based theory and ideology and identity. Again, that has no connotation or connection with the principal roots and the natural law tenets that form the basis of our shared constitution, as well as our representative republican form of government. A republic actually recognizes and defends the rights of the sovereign individual. Think of it like a cloth. When you have a societal fabric like that we have in these United States of America, what gives that fabric its form and its shape? Well, it's the individual fibers. Now, I know that I've mentioned this before, but it's true. If you take out the individual threads and fibers, say, of a great tapestry, that tapestry will cease to exist. And when you're trying to restore something, you look to fix the individual threads and fibers of it. But that's not what the alt-right does. That's not what Ramsey Paul said. You know, Ramsey Paul tried to come out and say that Colin Kaepernick's nation was African Americans. What nation is that? When I go and look at my globe, I don't see a nation called African Americans. I don't even see a nation called Africa. I see a continent called Africa. Maybe Ramsey Paul should go back and have some remedial courses in geography as to what a damned continent and country are. But no, he's not going to do that. He's going to speak of nationalism being within a people, within a race. But that's tribalism. That's a far different thing than what a nation is. And in the United States of America, the only thing that defines us both as a nation and as a people is the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared Constitution. We really have to get back to that. It's why we have said that the Constitution is the key. It's what will unlock the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. And make no bones about it, folks, what we're seeing out there is a push for oppression. We are seeing a push to try and pit American citizen against American citizen in this hopes of making us become tribal. So in that sense, the alt-right's no different than the Fabian socialists. Not at all.
Yeah. Adolf Hitler would be so proud of Ramsey Paul. He would be so proud of him. You know,
and that would make Ramsey Paul feel right at home.
Sure, of course it would. But I still want to focus on this thing of unity, because it's, again, whether it's a societal fabric or, to use it in a materialistic form, the tapestry. I was waiting for you to bring up Old Glory and unraveling the threads of Old Glory. That, you know, we know what the stars represent. We know what the 13 stripes represent. And if you were to take one thread and just start to pull on it, eventually the whole thing becomes unraveled. And the whole reason and intent behind that flag becomes non-existent. See, that's what they want to do. We have a national symbol. We have a national standard, that of the American flag. And a lot of folks don't realize the history behind it, and this would be something more for one of our episodes pertaining to the Declaration of Independence and Independence Day and so on and so forth. But it bears fitting here as well, because with unity, that's why we have our independence. And on a day like today, on this 15th anniversary of that travesty that befell our nation, the unity that came out of that is, again, much akin to the unity that we had in 1776. And when you take something like the flag, and where the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem, came from, with Francis Scott Key being held on a British ship off the coast of Fort McHenry. And in the morning, the bombs are still bursting And there's the flag flying high over Fort McHenry. Why? Because there was unity within Fort McHenry. They would not let that flag fall. They did everything they could. There's even stories that have been passed on through generations of individuals standing there during the bombardment, holding up that flagpole just so that that flag would fly high and proud.
Oh, well, let's go into the Mexican-American War of the 1840s and the standard type of battle procedure. The most sought-after position, even though it was the most dangerous one, was that of flag bearer.
Yes.
The flag bearer had no means of defense. But again, it goes back to this whole idea of sacred honor being the quintessential aspect of what made a nation work and what made people feel, a part of a community. And it was this idea of, because of the honor of that, because you were carrying what was the embodiment of your spirit, your nation, your family, your forefathers, all of that came together in this perfect symbol. And that was worth dying for. And they did die for it. And then think again to the Civil War and how the South was attacked for basically finding that same kind of value in, say, the Southern Cross battle flag and the other things that have come under attack, especially since 2015, which we have dubbed the summer of political correctness. All of that was attacked, again, because they're attacking the very symbolism of it all. But when you look at the history of the United States under the totality of the circumstances, you must come to the inexorable conclusion that that flag is a part of our shared history. That's the thing. We no longer talk about the community of popular sovereigns. We no longer talk about there being a greater good in this nation. And again, it's why we have so oft-times stressed the point and the importance of the whole of this nation being greater than the sum of its parts. And again, it's because there is this notion that we have a greater good, that we are a community, but it still has to be based on individualism. And that's actually a great type of comparison or alliteration to bring up with respect to a federalist system. You see, the states were never meant to be these inferior bodies. They were meant to be quasi-sovereign. And the federal government itself was meant to be quasi-sovereign. There was actually a three-part thing that made up sovereignty in the United States. It was we the people ultimately had popular sovereignty. We then delegated certain powers and authorities first to the state governments via the state constitutions, and then via delegates or representatives, in other words, a republican system, to the federal government. And the federal government is supposed to be the most limited of all, going by the natural order of things or the natural law. So you start with the fundamental building block of society, that of the family. That is your first opening point of government. That's the way the Founding Fathers viewed it. That's the way that successive generations of Americans viewed it until the 20th century. And the Thomas Dewey system of education began to pervert that, to change that and take it away. Then you move to your municipal, then to your county, then to your state, then to the federal government. Therefore, the further away you get from the people, the less power that government is supposed to exercise and exert, because, again, ultimate power rests within the hearts of the people. And so in order for the federal government to be able to act in any way, it has to trace its authority back to a power that is specifically enumerated to it by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the United States Constitution. That's why you have Article 1 that sets up the legislature, Article 2 that sets up the executive branch, and Article 3 that sets up the judiciary. Now, yes, there is some crossover. For instance, your bankruptcy courts are going to be Article 1 courts, and Congress does have the power to be a court. None of them have the spine to be one right now, apparently, but they do have the power to be one. But the separations of power goes into this whole notion of, again, the people being the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. That power was never meant to be concentrated in one specific branch of government or indeed in one level of government. Because when you do that, you are allowing there to be the same type of tyranny or despotism that existed in the British Crown and Parliament. Remember that one of the greatest sticking points for our founding fathers was this whole notion of virtual representation. They said that no, all of your houses of burgesses, all of your legislative bodies there in the colonies, they don't matter, because again, it is the centralized parliament and king that sovereignty resides in. And while this may sound so abstract, because we've taken it for granted for 235 plus years now, it was truly the revolutionary aspect of our nation, and it shows the infinite wisdom and foresight of our founding fathers to go forth and say, look, the people are the sovereigns, not the king, not parliament, and we should have representation going down to the closest level of the people, because in the end, who is really best fit to address the problems that you would encounter geographically or what have you in specific regions? You know, the problems up there in Michigan are not going to be the same as the problems we encounter here in Texas, are not going to be the same in that third world state of California or that worthless state of Washington state. I mean, yes, I'm being a little bit flippant here, but they deserve it. It goes to show that if you want to really address things, you need to allow the people to be able to address them closest to them. And that's what our founding fathers understood. But it's not the way Obama understands things. It's not the way that the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media understand things. And that's part of the great tragedy of what we're facing. It's part of the reason why we are in this insufferable position that we find ourselves in today.
I want to take that a step further. It's not often I get to do this. Let's take the constraints of power going all the way through, right back to the individual. But instead of at the local municipality, it begins in the home with the family. You have the patriarch and the matriarch, the mother and the father, who lay down the rules for the household. This is their foundational principles. Their rules are based off of this. You will do this, this, and this as a child. When you feel such a need to where you don't want to do that anymore, it is now that time for you to become an adult, and then you go off and you set your own terms and whatnot and rules for your household. People have forgotten about that. They have forgotten what it means to be a family first. Again, bring it all the way back to the unity, the unit, the family unit. They have done everything that they can to destroy this. I've encountered this when I was in grade school, Randy, and I'm sure you have as well, or have been privy to it with other classmates and whatnot, to where the school system interjects into the family home trying to dictate what the parents can and cannot do. You can't discipline your children because it's child abuse. But yet the Bible says to spare the rod is to spoil the child. And people say, and even that passage, that Bible verse, they want to take and parse it out, change the complete meaning to it, omit certain things, and say, no, the Bible says you're supposed to spare the rod and spoil the child. No. People, see, they want to take the term spoil and put some kind of utopian, glamoristic sheen on it. Oh, okay. You know what? If you don't beat your meat, don't beat your meat, spoil it. So are you going to eat spoiled meat? Because spoil means only one thing. It means to rot away, to become distasteful.
And that's the thing. We've allowed children to become rotten. We've, again, allowed there to be all of this self-gratification and this instantaneous gratification that has become part of a disposable culture. And I know that that's something that conservative pundits have discussed for decades now. But what we see, particularly in connotation and connection with this disastrous 2016 presidential election cycle, is that, again, we've named it the election cycle of betrayal. You have people like, even, I'm going to go out and say Mark Levin. I'm sorry, but when Mark Levin sat there with his squeaky high voice, and I know I don't have that deep of a voice, but God, I hope my voice is not as grating as his, but when he went out there and said, "Well, well, you big dope, I gotta support Donnie Trump because he's better than Hillary. I'm a constitutional lawyer, but I forgot what the Constitution's about. I forgot that you're supposed to vote your conscience. I forgot that was an aspect." Well, that's a problem, Mark. You're getting too hyper there. You're getting way too hyper there. Go take a trip back to Philadelphia, and if you're not mugged, go and visit Independence Hall. Because I remember on his first episode of Levin TV, that was the big thing he talked about, how that inspired him as a young boy, was to go to Independence Hall, to recall the stories of our founding fathers and the struggles that they went through and how they overcame all of the hurdles, obstacles, and adversities that were placed in their path. And despite that they were able to overcome it. They were able to overcome their differences. You know that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had been bitter rivals, and they actually died on the same day, on the 50th anniversary, about 2 hours apart, on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration on July 4th. They passed away, and Adams' last words were, "Jefferson lives," but he didn't know that Jefferson had already passed away. Those two men were able to put aside their differences. They were able to come together in the type of unity, in the type of familial sense that we saw in the immediate aftermath of those horrific attacks on 9/11. And again, that is what it means to be an American citizen. That's what it means to live up to being a virtuous republic. And recall, they expected us to be a virtuous republic. And so that means that you can't have this moral relativism. It means you can't have political correctness, because when you do that, you're using that as a wedge to divide people. You're using that to pit American citizen against American citizen. And for what? For what? To tear down that which has been the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running, constitutionally endowed, federalist representative republic in the entire course of human events. 230 some odd years, we have seen this Constitution be in place. But if you recall the words of the man who's deemed to be the father of the Constitution, James Madison, in his journal that we have, that he kept all throughout that process, he said, well, it's not a very good document, but it's the best we could do at the time. Their best is far better than anyone up on Capitol Hill today could achieve. Not a single one, except for a few we can name, Ted Cruz, Ben Sass, and Mike Lee. They're the only ones that could really do it. I don't expect John Cornyn to do it. I expect John Cornyn to tap dance on the Constitution while he tries to set it alight. What, Chuck the Schmuck Schumer? Really? Yeah. No. They are about destroying the country. That's a major difference between what you saw with the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. They at least had a vision for the nation. They at least were pushing for a cohesive nation. That's not what your frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists of today are pushing for. That's not what the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are pushing for. And so it brings us to this inexorable problem that we face. It brings us to this undeniable division that has been placed there by these people who just loathe and despise us. And it's because they think we have stolen what we have. I mean, look at the way that they treat the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that ended the Mexican-American War in 1846. Mm-hmm. They thought that we stole the land from Mexico, except that under James K. Polk, James Knox Polk, we paid for that land. Whenever in the history of humanity had the victorious army paid for the land that really should have been, in the traditional sense, the spoils of war? That was new. That was something that had never been done before.
And Polk was a visionary when he did that. An absolute visionary when he did that. But I think in a way, it was twisted, just like everything else. You see, it's twisted. And I've always been of the mindset, and I had this conversation with my dad yesterday. He happened to stop by. And I says, look, when did our country come to the point to where we got away from, when we entered into theaters of war, not claiming that land as our own? He says, well, we're supposed to be, United States of America, we don't do that anymore because of this, and this, and blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking to myself, and he doesn't agree with that, but he was laying down the mantra of what it is, well, we're supposed to, spread democracy and independence and this and that. Yes, that's true. But here's the thing. How's that worked with Iraq and Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia when we've entered into every skirmish into the Middle East because we've either gotten drug into it or our hand was forced due to attacks against us? See, I'm all for going and laying waste to a place like Iran and turning it into some kind of resort for American citizens. I don't have a problem with that. And people want to say, well, the United States has gotten away from the idea of, Alexander the Great being a great conqueror and this and that. Maybe that's what we need to do.
No. Because what it comes down to is the United States, going all the way back to the Barbary pirates, were only about promoting the ideals of the philosophy that we were founded upon. And that philosophy that we were founded upon was that of the natural law tenets. And we wanted more people in the world to embrace that. So, in fact, there's a great historical example that you can look to in Thomas Paine. Remember, Thomas Paine was the founding father that was perhaps the most outspoken. He even got into fights with George Washington after the Revolution because Washington didn't support what was going on in the French Revolution. Keep in mind, that was about 1792, shortly before Washington passed away. And what Paine was wanting was saying that Washington, we need to go, we need to help France. They're saying the same things we are. But no, they weren't. Because, again, there was the natural law tenets that are at the base of the United States. And it's based on the morality and ethics that were so important. Again, going back to that whole notion of sacred honor. France didn't have that. France did not have that. In fact, in France, you had Robespierre, who was an attorney, who was anti-capital punishment. That is, until he discovered the national razor invented by Dr. Louis Guillotine, and he found that he liked the national razor. He liked it so much that he started using it on his own government, the own Committee of National Security, until they decided that they didn't like losing their heads, so they put him into the national razor. It was a system that just ate itself. Why? Because they were based on this system of conquer. And in fact, you saw that continue over with Napoleon. Now, Napoleon said that Thomas Paine was a great and brilliant man. In fact, he went and he said that he had read Thomas Paine's Common Sense 10,000 times and that a statue should be erected of him in every city square. He didn't mean it. And of course, Thomas Paine went back to America and died a very broken man because Robespierre had even told him that he had betrayed the revolution. That's the thing. When you get institutionalized revolution, or when you get into this idea of pushing just to conquer for conquering's sake, you lose touch of the greater importance. Because again, what is it? It's breaking into disparate competing factions. What the United States has always been about is preserving liberty. Okay? That was what our founding fathers set about to accomplish with the conception of this nation 240 years ago with the Declaration of Independence, and it is what they have worked to preserve ever since. Because keep in mind, they have the Articles of Confederation that was first drafted in 1776, but were then found to not be strong enough because they couldn't levy taxes, and then you had 13 separate colonies, which then became 13 separate states, each with their own currency. And so there was no cohesive unity. That's what the Constitution did. The Constitution provided us with that unity. And so going all the way back to the Barbary pirates, we fought to preserve our rights and liberties and to spread the idea that that could be for others. But as for conquering, we were never conquerors. And if we become that, then we truly do betray what our founding fathers set forth. Remember that Washington didn't even want us to get entangled in foreign affairs.
Well, when I say conquering, like, you know, turning Iran into a resort, so to speak, it comes with that attachment of instituting and preserving liberty. That's the way I was going with that. Okay, so it's not to say you go in and just turn it into another faction of the United States or another separate state, so on and so forth. It's to conquer it, meaning to vanquish what was there before, and institute us as being the conquerors, instituting that liberty. And see, this is what it was, you know, the United States, again, was founded on, of, you know, spreading liberty and spreading freedom. If we were to go and vanquish and conquer Iran, we could turn it into a resort. In some cases, maybe that should happen, but there has to be that element of liberty and freedom there. That's what should be done. But see, we don't do that. We haven't done that since the Barbary Wars, or even since World War II. We haven't done that.
World War II would have been the last time that we did that. And again, it's because it has to be defensive in nature, and that's the thing. When moral relativism has come into society and basically essentially told us that there is no right and wrong, and, you know, when you can sit there and have people sit there and say that, well, there were innocent Muslims on that day too, I don't care. You see, what it comes down to is it has to be based on what happened on that day was inexorably linked to those fascist type of thinkers that want to drag us into a medieval form of barbarism. Does that mean all of them are that way? No, the Kurds are not that way. Certainly
Chaldeans.
A lot of the Northern Alliance that helped us was not that way. But the problem is, when we don't realize that there needs to be an end goal, instead we get so many little facets of goals running around. Instead of going in, achieving a goal, and getting out, we get mired in, well, we have to stop the sectarian violence between the Shia and the Sunni. You know, the only time that they were ever unified was under Salah ad-Din in the Second Crusade. And he was a Kurd, oddly enough. Today, you wouldn't get that. They loathe and despise each other. They try and kill each other at the drop of a hat. They just look for excuses to do that. And we are getting caught up in that. Again, because we got into this idea of moral relativism and political correctness. They are the religion of peace, and they're just going to welcome us with open arms. But that doesn't make any sense, because when you look at their nature, when you look at their history, that's not who they are. That's not what they have done. And it was a mistake on our part to think of it that way. But it's not as like Donaldolph Julius Caesar Trumpolini wants to say it. It's not that, oh, well, George W. Bush caused 9/11 because I got smally hands, they shrivel and they just die, and I got perfect hair forever, and I'm going to build a tower. Well, I built a tower, but I'll build a wall unless it's Tuesday, then I may not, because then that's Taco Tuesday, and I like having taco salads to offend people because, you know, I'm pretty good at this sort of thing. It's bigly. Yeah. No, that sort of redundancy, or not even having a coherent point, just saying something to try and basically wave a bloody shirt in front of people, that's done for political aggrandizement. It's not done to achieve anything. And that's part of the problem that we faced in Iraq and anything since Vietnam. We've been afraid to stand for anything, because, again, you had the wolves in sheep's clothing that were the Fabian socialists redefining who we were. They redefined the mission. And they essentially went out to try and proclaim defeat when, in fact, there was no defeat at the time. And then LBJ, being the spineless weasel he was, just didn't want to win.
I guess what my point is, I mean, it falls right in with that, is everything's been so politicized or made to be politically correct. We're not allowed to become engaged in foreign theaters and do our job. To go over and, liberate individuals. I remember the purple fingers, the ink-stained fingers with the voting in Iraq and this and that. People say, well, that was the last time, democracy and freedom and this and that. Yeah, to a small extent, yes, but how has that worked? How has that played out? Because, see, there's still a problem there. We were not able to do it effectively. Not the way we were with the Barbary War, not the way we were with World War II with Nagasaki and
Hiroshima,
because that was effective. And a lot of people say, well, tens of thousands of people died. Yes, but millions of people's lives were saved. And that instituted something within the Japanese culture and within Japanese people to where they said, there might be something to this. And now I believe they're an ally of ours.
Oh, they have been for a long time.
Long time.
Keep in mind, it was Susan Beate Gordon who was sent there by Douglas MacArthur to write their Constitution. Mm-hmm. Their Constitution is based off of the United States Constitution.
Yes. Now. That's what I'm talking about.
It's different, but it's not the same. And again, what that ties into, it correlates to this fact of we have politicians going out and setting ridiculous rules of engagement. Yeah. And we have politicians trying to second guess our military commanders. And that's one of the problems that Donaldolph Julius Caesar Trumpolini is going to have too. It's because he consults himself, his bigly beautiful brain that's
and F troop.
Yeah. That is going to be like LBJ but on steroids. That is going to lead to further deterioration. That is only going to cause tensions to get heightened and to once again have our alliances unravel. I mean, all of this talk of trying to get us out of NATO or to make NATO pay in violation of the treaty agreements that we've had that have been long-standing for, 50 plus years. I thought this guy was supposed to be a bigly great negotiator that understood everything because he's got perfect hair forever and has been such a wonderful businessman that's run most of the businesses that he's ever started into the ground. But that's beside the point. I digress, which he loves to do. He loves to digress. But what it shows is that we have to come back to a solid message. And that solid message is back to basics. And the basics have always been, the Constitution, our nation being that of laws and not of men, so equal protection under the law, and then not seeking to just go in to stay somewhere forever. Because we're not nation builders. We are the guiding light of liberty. We are a representative republic that was the entire aspect of who we are. And so it kind of ties into a note that you had written a while back. And let me see if I can find where that is so that I can read that. Looking here, not finding the link. If you could just shoot that to me, please. The link.
Sure. Yeah,
and then I will get to it. But it ties all in to who we are as a nation and as a people. And so it goes to the point you were making here. And you said you are never forgotten. And this was back on September 11th of 2011 that you said this. It was on this day, we suffered a fate that has scarred the country deeply. Brothers and sisters of this nation paid the ultimate price at the hands of evil. Our morale was shaken to the core and distress fell upon our land. But the sacrifice was not in vain. I will never forget. Our sons and daughters took credence to avenge the tragedy thrust upon our soil. the battle cry roaring and the guns blazing as they marched into war. With justice on their tongues and honor in their hearts, they pledged to give their life, and their sacrifice is not in vain. I will never forget. As time slips by, the dreary hearts falsely mend without shame. Many people cast aside the sacrifice of that day. In the hearts forever broken remain the solace of a spirit unbeaten, the one thing that is for certain that boasts the remembrance of the perished and slain. You will never be allowed to forget. Dedicated to the loved ones lost on September 11th, 2001. Those who stand tall abroad to defend and protect our country, and those who have fallen and paid the ultimate price, you are never forgotten. And folks, that literally is speaking to this spirit of unity, speaking to this spirit that defines us as a nation and as a people. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Alcohol helps form unity. Unless you are a drunkard, then it doesn't. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. As always, I've been joined by my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and we invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here on our YouTube page, our Google Plus page, or our Facebook page. And on top of that, we invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you'll find our departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy, and our Blogspot page where we're putting up audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program so that you can download it at your own leisure to listen wherever you want. And then there's the Cafe Press account. Jeremy, tell them a little bit about that.
Well, of course, you know, as it's been mentioned before, it is kind of a capitalistic adventure, but it's not something that we dwell on. We just want folks to be able to show their support for the show, but also show their support as a reminder to themselves and their friends that they are first-class passengers. They are part of the unity that this country thrives on. So, hats,
and what
shirts,
better way
t-shirts.
to show that than those hats, those shirts, those
Yes.
T-shirts, those drinking glasses, those iPod covers, iPhone covers, Android phone, and I guess they have Android pads, I have no idea, covers, tote bags, you name it. We've got it there at reasonable prices. Just take a look. You're sure to find something there that'll fit your needs. As always, folks, thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We'll see you again next time. Please do take care. God bless America.